Gian Wild, Mobile Accessibility, Testing Mobile Sites and Native Apps for Accessibility. Alicamp, Gold sponsors ANZ, Intopia and Telstra. Silver sponsors Canva and Coles. Supporters Rumour the Design Recruiter.
Hello and welcome to the Mobile Site and Native App Accessibility Testing Guidelines presentation. My name's Gian Wild. I'm from Accessibility Oz. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I managed to catch COVID at CSUN in 2023 and haven't actually recovered. I've been suffering from long COVID since. Anyway, love to be here to talk about mobile accessibility, even if it is virtually. First off, I'd like to acknowledge the Yagara people as the traditional owners of the land that I'm currently on and still have a strong attachment. When I'm talking about these guidelines, you can find them very easily on the Accessibility Oz website. Let me show you. If you go to the Accessibility Oz website and then go to the resources menu, you can see there's mobile testing here. And this is what I'll be talking about today. There are two sets of methodologies, the mobile site methodology and the native app methodology. There are 4 or 5 documents. There's the actual methodology itself. Think about these are like the equivalent to the WCAG 2 success criterion. Then there's the about mobile testing, so devices, assistive technologies, site types, variations, and then when you're talking about native apps, it's about capturing errors and devices, etc. And then you have your critical test cases, your test cases, and assistive technology test cases. So all the information that you could ever want is on this page. Now, just be aware that even though it's on the Accessibility Oz webpage, that doesn't mean that it is an Accessibility Oz product. It was written by a group of bipartisan accessibility specialists and companies, and it just ended up on the Accessibility Oz webpage because I was the chair. The first thing to know when it comes to mobile testing is that there's very different testing methods to when you're testing with desktop. For example, when you're talking about mobile sites, there are 4 main testing methods in mobile site testing. The first is testing on mobile and tablet devices. Second is testing on mobile and tablet devices with assistive technologies or accessibility features. Then testing on a responsive window on desktop, testing on desktop. With native app, there's only 2 testing methods, testing with the device and testing with assistive technologies. We really recommend, like I mentioned, really recommend that you don't use simulators. And this is exactly why. So this is quite an old screenshot. But, when I was flying LA, we'd sit on the tarmac and wait for an hour to get to the gate. But we could access the LAX Wi-Fi, which was great. Except, of course, here, when you did, you get this text that says, this page will redirect, so content doesn't really make sense to have here. And all of a sudden, I don't feel safe giving you my contact details. Now, how did this happen? This happened because people used simulators and they didn't actually do proper testing with proper devices in the location. So that's why you must use proper devices. Simulators are absolutely rubbish at showing you what assistive technologies will show as well. What are these methodologies? The mobile site methodology has 5 steps. The first step is identify devices, identify site type and variations, test critical issues, test mobile specific issues, and test mobile assistive technology and feature support. The native app testing methodology has exactly the same steps except for step 2, which is define application functionality. So let's talk about step 1, identify devices. The recommended devices and browser combinations that we determined as a committee were iPhone, if you're testing mobile site with Safari, iPad with Safari, and Android phone with Chrome. If you're using a Samsung device, we strongly recommend that you download Chrome. You don't use the inbuilt browser, as that's not very representative of what you would see on a variety of Android phones. Definitely use Chrome if you can. Other devices to consider was the Android tablet with Chrome and alternative devices such as a Kindle device if your users are using them. Recommendation was to test on the latest version of iOS and iPadOS and on the latest 2 versions of Android. However, in my testing, I've found that testing on just the latest version of Android is sufficient. And also, when a site is directly aimed at people with a particular kind of disability, consider including assistive technologies and devices that are used by potential users. So if you have a site about acquired brain injury, then, test with Dragon Naturally Speaking, for example. And just a note that you need to test WCAG 2 as well as this mobile testing methodology. So if it's in WCAG 2, it's not in the mobile testing methodology. If it's 2.1, it's in the methodology. If it's 2.2, it isn't. We haven't gotten that far yet. So the second step when it comes to testing mobile sites is to identify the site type and variations of the page. So is the site a desktop site, an MDOT site, or a responsive site? If the site is responsive, are there variations of the page? And just be aware, a lot of people will be like, what are you talking about? That's okay. All this stuff is detailed in the documentation, so have a look at the documentation. And one thing to remember is even if the site is a desktop site, people will still use that desktop site on mobile. In fact, if you have a look at Safari, you can actually see the option show desktop site. So if you have a desktop site that you're like, we've got a separate mobile site, remember that desktop site is also going to be used on mobile. So for native apps, the second step is a little bit different. It's called define application functionality. And so basically through your understanding of the purpose of the native app, define which functionality is critical to its purpose and use, and that must be tested for efficacy, operability, and workflow from a user experience perspective. If you have a think about, say, the Westpac website and the Westpac mobile banking app, the mobile banking app is a much more streamlined, much more focused native app that has a very specific task for users. So, the Westpac website will likely have things like contact details, store locations, store opening time, share price of Westpac, etc. Westpac banking app is not going to have that. It's all going to be about online banking. And so that's what you need to focus on when you talk about testing. Ask the question, would the experience be impacted if the functionality failed, the content could not be reached, and or the experience caused a barrier to the user? And then prioritize. So, of course, all functionality should be accessible within a native app. However, it's important to define and include the critical functionality for each individual app to be prioritized in testing. And then, of course, common elements that you must always test, things like navigation, landing screens, emergency sections, login flows, settings, accounts and profiles, contact us, real-time updates, privacy policy terms and conditions, interactional functionality, help section, widgets, calendars, etc., geolocational maps, and high traffic areas. And step 3 is test critical errors. Now, we identified these things called traps when it came to writing these guidelines. Now, a trap is where a user is trapped within a component and cannot escape without closing the browser or the app. Think of, Firefox video players, circa 2009. You could tab into a video player, but you couldn't tab out of it. You're basically trapped within the video player. And that's what's called a keyboard trap. It's included in WCAG 2. But we found there are actually a whole bunch more traps in mobile sites and native apps than in desktop. So we identified 5 traps: the exit trap, the swipe scroll trap, the text-to-speech trap, and the layer trap. And you can find details of each of these traps on the Accessibility Oz blog. The URL is https://tinyurl.com/3mnjm25h. So I'll read that out again: tinyurl.com/3mnjm25h. The next step after you've dealt with all the traps is to test mobile specific issues. So we broke up all the actual issues that need to be tested into certain categories, and these include alternatives, display, actionable items, navigational aids, audio and video, forms, and mobile and desktop interaction. Let's see an example from the document. These documents are in Word. I put them into PowerPoint, but it includes all the same information. This particular requirement is called a touch gesture. So any touch gesture must have an alternative, accessible, actionable item. And then we say, for more information, see success criterion 2.5.1 pointer gestures. This is actually a WCAG 2.1 requirement. So what is a touch gesture? Examples of touch gestures: swiping up and down or left and right, dragging up and down or left and right, double tapping, tap and hold, tap and swipe, 2-pinch zoom, and press and long hold. And what's an alternative accessible gesture? It's a link, a button, a drop down, or a separate page with the same functionality, of course, always coded properly. Each of these requirements have a section called About This Requirement, which explains why you want to actually follow the requirement. This About This Requirement says, this requirement is particularly important for screen reader users. For example, if you require your user to swipe right to complete a purchase, when the screen reader is on, the swipe right gesture moves you to the next focusable item and doesn't complete the purchase. You must be able to perform the same action by using a link, an up and down swipe, or some other gesture. And then there is a section called How to Test. And this How to Test says, identify any site controls. If they require any of the following gestures, is there an accessible, actionable item provided as an alternative? Swiping up and down or left and right, or dragging up and down or left and right, double tapping or 2-pinch zoom, tap and hold or tap and swipe, and press and long hold. So this is an example of something that is a pass for this particular requirement. Here you can see that the images are cut off on the right hand side of the screen. And this is a very common way of indicating that there is additional information if you swipe. But of course, swipe is not accessible, so you need an alternative as well. So here you've got 2 rows of content under the top stories heading, and as I said, there's more content visible on swipe. And there is also a link that says see more, and if you activate that link, the same content is shown in just one page as you would see if you swiped. Another example here is you have Google Weather, and there is a dragger bar that allows you to drag to a particular time to determine what the weather is supposed to be at that time. But there are actually links on that slider as well, so you can tap on the 12 p.m. link, for example, to determine the weather at a particular time of day. So that is also a past example. The fourth step is to test mobile assistive technology and feature support. The requirement is quite specific. When you're using a particular mobile assistive technology and feature, all actionable items and content must be able to be accessed and activated when that technology or feature is enabled. The Android assistive technologies and features that are included in the mobile guidelines are talkback, keyboard and switch, magnification, remove animations, color inversion, grayscale, color correction, increased display size, increased font size, increased text size with Chrome, and simplified view, of course, mobile sites only. And then the iPhone and iPad assistive technologies are VoiceOver, keyboard and switch, zoom, reduce motions, invert colors, grayscale, larger text, native app only, reader view for mobile site only, and reader view and increased text size for mobile site only. Now, just one thing about iPhone and iPad is that they actually operate on different operating systems, which means that you have to do your testing on an iPhone and you have to do your testing on an iPad, because it is not sufficient to just do it on an iPhone. The results will be different if you also do that testing on an iPad. You can find these methodologies, as I mentioned before, but now that you know a bit more, you might be a bit more interested. The Accessibility Oz homepage, to the resources main menu, and then you go to mobile testing. All the information is there for you. So what's next? Now, these guidelines were released in early 2020, and as the chair, unfortunately, I haven't been able to really get the mobile committee going again. There definitely are some updates that need to be done. Of course, the first one is the updates from WCAG 2.2. They absolutely need to be incorporated. And then there are, of course, additional assistive technology and mobile features, of course, things like voice control that need to be included. We do need to review existing test cases because we find that some of the traps now occur on mobile site and native app where they just occurred on native app, etc. And there also needs to be a removal of some assistive technology and mobile assistive features. For example, grayscale and color correction pass and fail together, which means that if you test grayscale on iOS and it fails, color correction will also fail on Android. So you don't need to test both of them. You only need to test one. And then, of course, we need to really create an online resource, something that is not just Word documents. We have been doing that slowly. All the traps are now online. This is the mobile site and native app articles that have been published so far. Got introduction, identifying devices, identifying site type and variations, and defining application functionality, testing critical issues, mobile specific issues, and we have the 5 traps here. If we have a look at this, you can see what methodology it applies to, the users it applies to, the actual rule, you've got the about, the requirement, and there's a number of different sets of information about, say, timed ads and iOS testing, a section about how to test, and then you've got some examples of accessible solutions. So you can have a look at that and hopefully learn a bit more. So that's what we're hoping to do. But of course, it's going to take time. To access that, you can go to tinyurl.com/3mnjm25h. So I'll say that again, 3mnjm25h. And also, if you're interested in learning more, check out our public training sessions. So we started them last week, but if you go to training under public seminars and training, you can have a look at a couple of seminars that we've got and training. Specifically, we're doing mobile site and native app accessibility training on Wednesday, the 26th of November, and you can get a 10% discount by using the access code AliCamp is champ. So A1Y camp is champ. And go to the tinyurl.com YX37JYT2, or you can just go to the Accessibility Oz website and click one of these links under training, public seminars and training, and it'll take you to Humatics. Thank you very much for coming today. Once again, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. If you're interested in this, you want to get access to the slides, go to accessibilityoz.com/about/conferences and you'll have access to the slides. Please reach out to us if you need any accessibility assistance, and I hope you have an excellent rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
AliCamp, celebrating 10 years.